Hi there, and welcome to Let's Slow Down, a podcast for all of you who feel tired and stressed from this overwhelming world. Here we'll have fun, inspiring conversations about living life on our own terms and explore ways to ease the pace of our modern world, because life really is good when you're relaxed enough to be present for it. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Stolting, and I welcome you to this space where I hope to inspire you to slow down, because life is too short to let it go by in a blur. So take a deep breath, relax, and enjoy the show. I love hosting this podcast because it gives me an opportunity to talk to people that I am really interested in, and it gives me a good excuse to reach out and say, hey, let's have a conversation. Today is one of those conversations. I am thrilled to share my interview with Jennifer from Simply and Fiercely. It's a blog based on decluttering and minimizing your possessions. So that's a little bit of a new topic for us here on the podcast. It's a huge theme in my life. I've been working on this for years, and I've been following her on her blog, simplyfiercely.com, for quite a few years now. And she's very inspiring and motivating and very down to earth in her tips and her advice. We will hop right into our interview. We kind of jumped right into it. I hope you enjoy the show. And as always, check out the show notes for more information on everything that we've talked about and all of the links. Okay? Thank you for listening. I really want to jump into everything, all things minimalism and decluttering. I know that is your wheelhouse. And on the podcast, we have been exploring lots of different topics related to slowing down. Most of the things we've focused on thus far, we're about 3 months in, and it's been a lot of slowing down in terms of stress and fast-paced living and all of those things. But obviously, decluttering and minimalism goes hand in hand with all of that. So you are the first minimalist expert that I am getting the opportunity to interview, and I am so excited. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's interesting what you were saying about slowing down, because right before we hopped on this call, I was looking at the email that you sent me and, the title of your podcast, and just really thinking about slowing down. And it's a bit like you said, you haven't really had anyone talking about minimalism and decluttering yet. And I was actually just thinking about how much doing that, how much simplifying and decluttering has helped me slow down. So if you wanted, I'm happy to have a little chat about that.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Because I feel like sometimes people, in my experience, when they hear about minimalism and decluttering, their first thought is they're really focused on the practical benefits.
Yep.
Like they just don't want to have so much to clean. And that's like sort of the physical clutter is what they're really focused on. And while obviously that's a benefit, that's probably not the biggest benefit for me. I am not you're never going to see my house on Pinterest. I'm not like a stylish minimalist, which I guess is what the aesthetic you see on some accounts.
Right.
But for me, the benefit of minimalism and why I'm so passionate about it and why I talk about it all the time is because for me, minimalism is the key to creating freedom in your life, whatever that looks like for you. And so it's funny, right before we started this call, I was thinking about one of the greatest things in my life for me is my ability to have slow mornings. When you think of this idea of defining success for yourself, for me, success, it's not about how much money I have in the bank or about, owning certain physical possessions, but having the luxury of time to have a slow morning is like the epitome of success for me. I feel like, I've really checked off a huge sort of stone in my life that I've reached that spot.
Absolutely. That's golden, priceless.
Oh, yes. And, that's even with kids. I've never really been a morning person, but I was diagnosed with quite severe asthma last year, and it really bothers me the most in the mornings. Fortunately, I'm doing a lot better now, but so I really need that time. And I was just thinking about how did I get to that point where I have that lifestyle? And this is a question a lot of people hear, or a lot of people ask me when I talk about minimalism, is how I talk about these kind of things being the benefit, but sometimes people have a hard time connecting the dots.
Right.
And it's been a long process, but for me, it's the act of simplifying decluttering first, but then applying that same skills to my spending, my schedule, downsizing my home and my life. Basically, when you do that, when you really apply that to the big picture of your life, you create white space, you create freedom, which is not just, it's more than just having the freedom to slow down in the morning. It's a bigger picture. It's having the freedom to try new things, to make mistakes. And that has what it's that kind of freedom, which let me eventually start my business, which is the lifestyle that lets me have these slow mornings. And I think that's the piece that people are sometimes missing. Like people will say to me, oh, I'd like to make a change in my life, but I can't because of X, Y, and Z. And minimalizing and downsizing helped me remove some of those X, Y, and Z's,
right?
So that I had space to fail, space to try new things, which is how you eventually get to the spot where you can slow down. It's a much longer process, but it's much bigger, I think, than people initially think it's going to be.
Right. Wow. That's been the journey that I've been on for quite a while now, because I did start to connect those dots and realize, okay, it's more than a pared down kitchen or a cleaner closet. It's more than that. My house is not magazine ready either, ever. It's lived in. We have a lot of life going on.
Yep.
That's the season that we're in. That's the season that you're in. And that's life, right? Like we have real lives. So as I started to do some of those things, I started to realize, oh, okay, this actually does give me a lot of clarity and a sense of calm. And it's affecting in a positive way all those other areas of life that you had mentioned. And I think for a lot of our listeners, as I was saying, you are the first minimalist expert that we have on the show. So, for a lot of people, we'll kind of speak in very basic terms today about some of these benefits that minimalism and decluttering have afforded you in your life and your family. That white space that you were talking about, I love that. And, we can get into a little bit of the why and then a little bit of the how for people listening. Like, okay, that makes sense. I think it's a great idea. Now what? Because I know it can be very daunting when you first start having these ideas and kind of buy into the whole thing, right? This was a few years back for me when I was like, this makes so much sense. The Minimalists, I watched that documentary on Netflix, and that was one of the first things for me. That was my first window into it all. And I was like, yes, I want to do that right now. And they're pretty extreme. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I recommend it. But they get down to like living out of a backpack kind of life. So as Jen was saying, it's going to look different for everybody, just like slowing down looks different for everybody. So it's very unique, but it can offer so many benefits. So I don't know, where should we start? For the person listening that's like, yeah, this sounds interesting. Tell me more. Let's go from there.
Yes. So I guess I'm going to start about the why. I guess it's the thing that when I'm talking to some of my clients or readers, one thing that a lot of people tell me is that their lives are so busy, right? They're so go, that they don't even have time. It's like living in survival mode. So they don't even have time to, So just the idea, like, because there's this saying in minimalism, right, that we're decluttering our lives to create space for what matters. And people tell me, I don't even know what matters. I haven't even sat down and thought about what I want, what I care about in so long, because I'm just trying to get through each day. And that's what happens when you start to declutter. So the first step is that physical breathing space, right? So you declutter your kitchen or you declutter kids' toys and you create that tiniest bit of space to breathe because you're spending a little bit less time doing housework, a little bit less time, shopping. Just you claw back your time in elements.
Right.
And then as you claw that time back and you have just a little bit of space, I'll be honest, at first, what most people do is it doesn't feel instantly great like they're expecting. Because when we're so used to being busy, when we create space, our instinct is to fill it back up again.
Yes.
Right. It's kind of
Yeah,
like,
it's like
have
a
you
nervous
ever,
energy, right? Like we don't know what to do with it.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's like, have you ever sold a piece of furniture or taken down a picture off the wall, and for the first few days you look at it and it looks so odd
Yep.
because you're
Looks
like,
wrong.
exactly.
Something's missing.
And that's kind of how it is in our life. But then if you just wait long enough, if you don't rush out to replace it with something, you get used to it. And that's kind of the cycle that I find. So it starts with this very beginning of just having the less stuff in your home. And then as you have that space, you have to force yourself. It's almost like you have to learn to slow down a little bit.
Yep.
And then it keeps refining itself. And one thing that I warn people is sometimes when you create that space, what pops up is maybe things that you've been putting off dealing with, like bigger issues that we can avoid when we're in survival mode. Like maybe, you've got your relationship with your sister or something, you haven't been talking and you've been ignoring it because you've been so busy. And now you start to slow down, and then you've got to go, deal with this problem that you've been avoiding. But it's a process, it's a cycle. I like to think of minimalism and decluttering. It's a lot of people think of it as a project, the way you would think of like spring cleaning. But I think of it more as learning a new way to make decisions, and it becomes a lifestyle.
Yes.
Where you are constantly thinking intentionally about what you're going to bring into your life or what you allow into your life. And that's a skill that's easy to start with physical decluttering because it's so practical, right? It's not necessarily easy, but it's easy to get our minds around it. I'm deciding, do I want to keep this toaster? Do I want to keep this sweater? And then we start to think about, okay, well, do I want to keep going to, this club that I go to on Thursday nights? Do I want to keep spending my money in this way? And that's where over time, you get these really cumulative benefits, as I was sort of saying at the beginning, where you can really start to slow down. You create space to think of things you've never even thought of. One thing I like to say is that sometimes you don't realize that you don't even have dreams anymore. You don't even have big dreams because your life is too busy for that. And you have to downsize and simplify just to have time to daydream like you did when you were a kid. And you get these big dreams. And then you can start to change your life if that's what you want to do. Maybe you just want to relax with your family, or maybe you want to write a novel. There's no right answer. It's just you won't even have time to think about these things when your life is busy and cluttered. So I guess that's the big why for me. That's why when I tell people about minimalism, when I'm trying to sell them on this idea, it's not like the minimalist. I really try to really emphasize this to people that for me, it's not about, how many coffee mugs you own.
Right.
It's about how you feel in your home, in your skin, in your life. And when you feel like you have the right, there is enough for you, that's minimalism, whether your neighbors think you're a minimalist or not.
Really taking that control back and having that agency in your life rather than having life sort of run the show, rather than life happening at you all the time and you're always reacting. You actually have time to be more intentional, make those choices that you actually have thought through and make because you intentionally want to make them. Whereas when you get stuck on, it's truly a hamster wheel. You get stuck in that. You're just going. You don't even stop to think. You don't even have that space to think. What do I want? How am I?
That is such a fantastic point. And that actually really leads into the how of decluttering. So I take what I believe is a sort of unique approach to decluttering, and that what you were just saying about that being reactive versus being intentional, I apply the same approach to actually decluttering your stuff. So what I think most people who, or at least for me, when I was first learning about decluttering, it almost felt weird to learn about it because it felt like it should be so simple, right? Like all I'm going to do is go through my stuff and decide what do I want to keep and what do I want to, sell or donate, right? It almost feels ridiculous that it's something that you have to learn. But what I realized is once I started doing it, and for those who don't know my story, I used to be a shopaholic for a good 15 years. I had so much stuff, especially, clothes, shoes, but I really had stuff in every corner of my home. And from when I first discovered the idea of minimalism, like you saw the documentary, I had come across a few blogs. Until I actually started to make any kind of significant difference in my life was a period of several years. I would say like 2 or 3 years. And what I kept doing is just trying to declutter the way I thought I was supposed to, which was just, they say, take everything out of your closet, dump it on your bed, go through it, one or at a time. Does it spark joy, And it sounded so logical, but a few things are happening. First of all, as anyone who's actually tried it knows, there's often a lot of emotions in your decluttering, and you get things that sometimes you don't even know why you want to get rid of it, but you just feel so attached and you're like, I don't know what's going on.
Right.
You feel like almost like it's clinging to you. It's really hard to do that.
Yeah.
And then what I also found is, on top of that, when I did make progress, one of two things was happening. I would I'd be decluttering my closet. I'd get a few bags. They'd go out the door. I'd feel like a temporary high, but then I would fall into the same old habits and my closet would fill up again. Or I would, declutter and I'd feel happy that I had less stuff, but I wasn't necessarily any happier with my closet or with my home. I'd look around and I'd kind of think, I've gotten rid of things, but I'm not getting those benefits that I was expecting. I was expecting to feel a certain way, and now I don't. I'm a bit disappointed. And so what I realized after years, I think I first was introduced to the concept of minimalism in around 2009. So it's been a really long time that I've been sort of just thinking about it and learning about it, is that traditional way of decluttering that most people think of is very reactive, right? You're going through things and you're just reacting to it. You're like, should I keep it? Should I not? But what you were talking before about this idea of being more intentional with our lives and thinking about what do we want and how do we craft our life in a way that we are working towards our goals, I believe in doing the same thing with decluttering. So the way that I teach it is actually a 3-step process that you could use to simplify anything in your life. You start with physical clutter. And I think that physical clutter is a good way to practice the process.
Sure.
And then you could start to apply it to, your spending, your shopping, your relationships, your thoughts, anything. But it starts with clarity. And it's like we were saying a bit before, we think about, what do we want? What do we even want out of life? Well, we have to ask the same questions about our homes when we're decluttering. What do I want from my closet? What do I want from my kitchen? Right? Because it's not the same for everyone. If you are a passionate cook who loves entertaining, the kind of feeling, the kind of space you want to create in your kitchen is different from someone who doesn't really like to cook, but it's just a space where, the family gathers and it needs to have other functions. So what we have to start with is just creating clarity about our space. The more that we think about it, the more detail, the easier the decluttering becomes. And I'll just share a quick story that I often give people as an example to help visualize this. If you and I were, hanging out and we were friends and we were like, oh, we should go to New York for the weekend. Wouldn't that be a good idea to do it one day? And we were like, yeah, that sounds great. And then we just dropped the topic. What are the odds we're going to go away? Pretty low, right? That's the kind of thing.
Right.
Exactly. But if we sit there and we spend like an hour and we get online and we start Googling hotels and we even look at the restaurants we want to pick and we look at the menu and the places we want to go, we're really forming a vivid picture in our minds, right? And we're that much more likely to go, because if we don't, we're feeling like we lost something. We start to build that in our minds. So now we really want to follow through. And it's the same with decluttering. If you just say, hey, I should declutter someday, it's like, what do you think is going to happen? It's always going to be on your to-do list, but you're never going to do it. But if you spend, just even 30 minutes, it doesn't have to be crazy, even 15 minutes, thinking about what your life is going to be like. And I'm talking about the details. What are you going to do with the extra space? What are you going to do when you have more time in your life, right? I'm going to sit down and read a book and I'm going to make myself a cup of hot tea. And you actually imagine how it's going to feel to relax and have that moment to yourself. Well, now you have first you have a different motivation for decluttering, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, I want that. I really want that. I'm going to have it. But more importantly, and this is what comes to my second step of decluttering, which I call intentional action, is that now when you are decluttering and you have this vision in your mind, you're thinking when you go through your stuff, hey, is this going to help me create that life that I want or not? So you're not just thinking, should I keep this? And you're not getting as weighed down in the little things like, oh, but I spent, $6 on this. I don't really want to waste that $6. Now you're thinking is, what is $6 versus taking me closer to this dream that I have for myself.
Yes.
And it becomes, it's just about just reframing things. And I'm sure just whenever people are talking about slowing down in general, it's often we have to reframe the situation.
Mindset. Absolutely.
Exactly. And so that's what I think was missing for a lot of people when they're decluttering. Like when you're just going through things one at a time, it can be really exhausting. And there's other tips and like hacks and techniques that can help you. But at a big picture level, it's really about thinking of decluttering not as a chore, not as a way of cleaning, but as a tool to take you closer to that life that you want. And then the third part that I teach on the sort of how to declutter that's really important is that we practice something that I call compassionate curiosity, which is all about getting curious about a whole range of things about why you feel so attached to your clutter. Because this is something I've learned, and again, it applies to everything, not just your stuff, it applies to your schedule, is that sometimes we keep things for a whole variety of things. A story that I often tell is that I moved from America to Australia in 2003. And I actually came over here with almost nothing. I brought 2 large suitcases and I shipped over a small box, which I think, for most people to start your life over is not that much stuff.
Not at all. That's amazing.
But funny enough, I definitely did not become a minimalist at that stage. I got to Australia and I went whole hog and rebuilt my life. But one of the funny stories I always tell people is that when I was thinking of, what is worth bringing, one of the things that I laugh at this now is that I brought a stack of my old college textbooks. They were like a calculus book, a physics book, and they were one of the last thing I decluttered. I moved all over. I moved several times across Australia. I brought these heavy stack of textbooks with me all over the world. And this is what I talk about, this compassionate curiosity. If you had asked me why I kept these textbooks years ago, I would have told you this story that like, I might read them again someday, which we all know is kind of ridiculous, right? Nobody is going to sit down and read a calculus textbook for fun.
Right.
But when I started practicing what I talk about, this act of compassionate curiosity, which is really about getting to the root of your clutter and understanding, why on earth am I carrying these textbooks around? The truth is, what I realized is I went to university or college, as Americans say, for 5 years, but I never finished my degree. I was very indecisive. I kept changing majors, and then I ended up moving overseas. And I've always carried like a bit of shame or guilt that I didn't finish that because, I was a first generation American. I was really raised in a culture where like, you must go to college. If you don't go to college, if you don't have the degree to prove it, you're not intelligent. And I was hanging on to those books almost as like a way of validating myself. Like, look, I was smart. I don't have the degree to prove it, but look, I've got a physics book sitting on my shelf, which sounds so silly to tell you. But in truth, on a subconscious level, that's why I was hanging on to these things. And it wasn't until I allowed myself to get curious about why I was keeping it, and then to be kind to myself and compassionate, which is why I call it compassionate curiosity, because it's so easy to judge yourself.
Right.
And you just shut down. And it's funny because, again, I guess being that this podcast is about slowing down, I was on another podcast interview years ago, and I was telling them about this story and about how I was starting to realize the way that I used my physical possessions in multiple ways, but in that situation was sort of to protect myself. She was telling me that just through our conversation, she realized that the reason that she was so busy taking her kids to so many different activities wasn't because she thought that her kids needed them or enjoyed them, but came from a place of fear where she was worried that people would think she wasn't a good mom because, her kids weren't doing enough activities, which is something I relate to now that my kids are getting to that age. But it's that process, and we repeat it, day after day, time after time, with just thinking about how do we want to live our life? What intentional actions can we take to get there? And then being compassionate and curious about why we struggle. And for me, that has been the secret to decluttering my home. And when you declutter in that way, that's how you learn the skills, I believe, that help you slow down and get those bigger level benefits from, minimalism and decluttering.
And the long-term benefits, right? Where it's actually going to stick, and, you're not just going to declutter that that room or your schedule one time and then fall back into those old ways. So,
Oh, absolutely. I remember thinking, and I think a lot of people sometimes feel this way when they have a lot of clutter, like being just wishing that I could close my eyes and it would all disappear, like snap.
poof.
And I would just have yep. And then I would have this fresh start. And of course, I told myself that if I had this fresh start, I wouldn't get myself into that place again. But, that's what I say. As I told you, I moved from America to Australia with, less than would fit into a small van, or, not even close to a small van, to be honest. And I filled my life right back up again. And it's because if you simplify, if you downsize, but you don't take the time to learn from your clutter and to learn from the experience, then you end up making the same mistakes all over again.
Yep.
And I'm sure it's like I'm sure, with slowing down as well, you can say no to a bunch of stuff and declutter your schedule. But if you're not really clear on your vision and, what your boundaries are and what your goals are for life, or why you kept saying yes in the first place, it's all going to come back. It's going to creep its way back and you're going to feel like, oh, that was great, but it didn't really change anything.
Yep. It's so true. And I think what makes it really hard is looking around and that comparison of, like you were talking about the mom, right, who is doing all the things. So when we look around, I think what makes it so challenging, besides the fact that it is just a challenging process, right? Especially when you haven't always done it, always lived that way. So you're making changes, making intentional changes, you're feeling the benefit, but then you step outside of your home, outside of your world, and everybody around you is just go, go, go and buying. Like the consumerism is just off the charts. And it's so, I'm getting better at it, but it's so hard not to get caught back up in it. It really is. And especially I think as a parent, we're both moms. There's a lot of parents listening to this. And you start to feel like, am I not making the right choice? Like they're going to be behind or they're not going to fit in or all of those things. So you can't help but question yourself, right? Second guess it.
Yeah.
I have found, since kind of along the lines of what you were saying with decluttering and realizing like what your why is, what your values are, the meaning behind it, as I become clearer on all of those things, because the schedule for me was a big one. And my kids are older than yours. I have a high schooler, a middle schooler, and then an almost 9-year-old.
Oh, wow.
And so we've got elementary school, middle school, high school. Crazy. Three different school schedules. Let's start there. That's like crazy. And then when you add
I can imagine
all the activities and everything. And I'm getting better at saying no, even if there is a sports practice every single day of the week, sometimes that doesn't fit with our schedule. And I'm all about making like a solid commitment, and when my kids commit to something, if they're going to do it, they're going to do it the right way. But we can, as parents, put boundaries on things. And if your child needs a night or, they're just not feeling great, rather than maybe the old me would have pushed. Well, we have practice, we have to go. But now I'm like, let's just put things in perspective here. You're not feeling great, or you had a crazy day. Maybe going to that practice tonight, being out late, being in the cold, maybe that is not the best choice for your overall well-being.
Yep.
Even though it's
absolutely
not the thing everybody else is doing, because everybody else just puts their head down, pushes through it, and makes you question yourself, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I definitely think that, so my kids are 2 and 5. And so I definitely feel that whenever I talk about this process of simplifying, but I do think that whenever you have a big life change, sometimes you do have to start from the beginning again, because as I said, the first step is understanding your values, your priorities, your vision for your life. And when something significantly changes that, then you kind of have to start from the beginning again. So even though I've been on this journey, I guess, for quite a long time, I did feel like I had to take a step back after I had my kids and kind of relearn things again, relearn how is my life going to look, now that my circumstances have changed. And so like that not even started with the physical clutter. Like I had to learn what kind of stuff do I need as a mom, which isn't always straightforward. Like sure, as you have kids, you have to test things like
it's not straightforward at all.
Like I always laugh when I see these like minimalist lists that are like, the top 10 baby essentials, because especially with two kids who were completely different, I know that, you can say, oh, this type of sleeping bag or this type of cot or bouncy chair, or whatever, is the best, right? You say that with your one kid, and then you have another kid and you realize what a fool you were because it was the best for one child.
Right.
But the other one looks at you like,
They
what
are
are you
all
doing?
different.
Exactly. So it's constantly learning it. I just want to point that out too, because I think sometimes people who are involved in minimalism and decluttering and simplifying feel a bit of shame or guilt when they have to step back, or even when you're slowing down. You made progress and now you have to sort of start over again. And it feels like you failed, but you're not really failing. It's just the natural cycle. It's a cycle of life. But the other thing that comes to mind with what you're talking about, your kids, and what I find helpful with decluttering or with our schedule, with slowing down, is taking time. I'm a big fan of journaling and writing down, but even if you're not a writer, if someone listening to this, even if you just think about it intentionally, and say with motherhood, to think about, what does being a good mom mean to me? Which sounds deceptively simple, but the more that you think about it and really lay down, a clear vision for yourself, it's really important. Because what happens in the moment, like you said, your kid isn't feeling well, but you're also feeling these conflicting sort of values, because part of you wants them to have grit and you want to follow through with the things that you say you want to do, and you want to teach them that, but you're also, you're feeling at a crossroads, perhaps, maybe torn in different directions. I think that's something we feel a lot with busyness, just in general. Like everything feels important. What do we do? And when you're in that moment and the emotions are flooding you, it's hard to make decisions. But I find that even having, just, as I said, I'm a journaler, so I haven't written in my journal, I could kind of go back and think, well, when I wasn't in the moment, when I wasn't overwhelmed by emotions, what did I say was most important to me? How did I say I wanted to parent? What did I, define being a good mother as? And then I could kind of say, oh, right, well, in the moment I'm feeling conflicted because I feel pressure because I see what, so-and-so's doing with their kids. But it helps me to reflect on what I've already said and say, actually, this is the mother that I want to be, and this is what I'm going to do.
Yes.
And again, that's a lesson that I derived from decluttering, because it's the kind of thing, let's say, one thing I do when I'm decluttering something like my closet, for example, is I try to pay attention to what I do or don't wear. So, for example, I find that if I buy long dresses, I like them. They look beautiful. They're okay on me, but I never really wear them because I prefer shorter things, right? And so I learned that by being curious about my closet. And now I have sort of an intentional rule for myself. I don't buy long dresses because I know that in the end, I know from experience, I'm not going to wear them. But when I'm decluttering, I can say all that and I can tell you that and feel really good about it. But then when I'm in the shop and I see one that I love and the emotions kick in, you're tempted. You want to be like, oh, I know I said that, but maybe this is the exception.
Right. This one's extra cute.
That's right. This one's extra cute. And you get lost in that moment. But then when I reflect on that and I sort of say, hey, actually, I told myself that that's not who I am, I find that little extra layer of thought, that little layer of intentionality helps me go back to, oh, yeah, that's what I said about myself. And so it sounds so kind of basic when I'm talking about a dress, but when you think about your values and how you spend your time, you can do that exact same thing. And it's just a skill that you have to practice, really, I think.
Yeah, it changes things for you, right? It changes the way that we make our decisions, not just going through the motions, but making them count. And another thing I was thinking as you were talking was absolutely going back to what is most important to you. As my kids are getting older, the last couple of years, especially, I've really been a lot more aware of what am I modeling to them? They're going to learn from us, right? They're around us, parents, more than any other adults. And what kind of behaviors am I modeling? Am I modeling healthy choices, healthy schedules, just all of it? What am I modeling them? If all I show them is, oh, we have to run around to X, Y, and Z and this, and mom's always kind of frazzled and we never have enough time. We never get time to rest, which is definitely how we have been in the past. That isn't what I want to model to them. That makes me feel bad. I'm like, no, that isn't how I want to raise them. But if that's how we're acting, that's all that they know. So we have to really take that step back and be like, what is this looking like through their eyes? What are they learning and absorbing from this? I think just modeling those behaviors and the values and the choices is so important, practicing what we preach, because we can say it, but then are we really living it?
Oh, absolutely. Like what I think about there is that, so I'm sort of a self-proclaimed, I used to be a shopaholic and also a workaholic as well, up until from a really young age. So as I said, my family migrated from China, my mom's family. And so they had a Chinese restaurant. And, we grew up there. So we started working really young. By 16, I had 2 jobs.
Oh my gosh.
When I was in university, I worked 60 to 80 hours a week while I was going to school.
What?
And what I thought, and I realize now it's because obviously they weren't doing this, I guess, to project a message to me, but my grandparents and my grandmother, who is 83, only just stopped working. She was still working double shifts at a restaurant.
Oh my gosh.
Up until like 2 weeks ago,
God
right? 10-hour shifts. Yeah. But when I was growing up as a kid, my grandparents worked 365 days a year. So they closed half a day on Mondays, and that was it. We were open every holiday. We used to have Christmas dinner in the restaurant while getting up from dinner to serve customers.
Oh my gosh.
While we're having our Christmas dinner.
Wow.
And so I took that belief on board because it was modeled to me that, like, I used to work in restaurants then when I was like in my early 20s. And I remember getting off a shift at 3 a.m. and them asking me if I would come back and work the 7 a.m. shift. And I was like, yes, of course I will. Because I thought that what made me special is that I could work harder.
Right.
Than
right.
anyone
It's like
else.
a badge of honor. Yeah.
Exactly. 100%. And it took me so long. Like, physically decluttering was much easier than getting comfortable with slowing down and sort of detaching my self-worth from being that person who can do a million things. And as I said, my grandparents are like the most lovely people I've ever met. They weren't modeling this in a way, it wasn't from a bad place, but it's just being aware that how children witness things and how they absorb it. And it's also interesting because something people ask me a lot with minimalism and decluttering is how to get your family on board.
I was going to ask you that. Yes, because I think that's really hard. I'm all in, and my family's kind of like they get it. They realize, but they are not all in the way I am. So what do you do with that?
So I have a technique that I think really works, but it's also not going to be what people want to hear because it's not a quick solution. So people often think like, I need to sit them down and we need to have a meeting and I'm going to talk to you all about how we're making this big life change and how it's going to be so important. Or they try to, like, maybe not intentionally, but kind of shame people by throwing up statistics like, the average family has so much stuff and all this stuff goes to the landfill. And I notice that just in general, as humans, I think this is how we think that we get other people to change. But I am the type of person who cannot stand being told what to do by other people, right? As soon as you tell me that I need to do something, like I was the kind of kid, my poor mother, who I'd be ready to clean my room, but if she told me to clean my room, I'd be like, I'm not cleaning my room, right? Like I can't be told what to do. And I genuinely believe that people are going to get the most out of minimalism and decluttering, including our families, if they follow the same pattern than we are. So we are modeling, leading by our vision. So we're not decluttering. When we declutter, we're not modeling it being like a shameful thing or, beating ourselves up. We are talking about the benefits, how we are creating this life that we want. And then we model that. So one thing I notice, a sort of mistake, I guess, that people make when they're trying to simplify is, and you probably see this with people who want to slow down. They're going to do X, Y, and Z. And when they're done, they're going to simplify and slow down. They're going to relax and enjoy it. But they set this huge task. I've got to declutter my entire house before I can sit down and relax and do all those things I told myself I'm going to do.
Yep. I've been there.
Yep.
That's a tough,
yep.
It's so hard.
Same.
Because the list never ends.
Exactly. But here, what I found, it's kind of a cycle. You have to, if you want to keep going, if you want the momentum, you have to enjoy the journey, right? So you have to be modeling. I created a little bit of extra space in my home, a little bit of extra space in my schedule, slowing down. I am going to model to everyone how I'm going to use that to live the life that I want. So I'm going to say, I'm going to sit down now and I'm not going to worry about that mess. I'm going to model how I'm enjoying this. And I'm going to make a point, without being preachy, of saying I'm doing this as a direct result of, I'm getting what I want because I took these actions, and I'm modeling it to them, and I'm showing them, and I'm talking to them about what they want. So even with my daughter, who is 5, she's probably a bit spoiled in this retrospect, in that we've done a lot of travel. I'm American, but I live in Australia, and my husband is English. And then my mother-in-law, she's lived in Ireland and Spain. So we've done a lot of traveling just because, we've got family, close family everywhere. And so my daughter, even at 5, loves to travel. She calls hotels cool houses. And so, or just any house that isn't ours, like if we stay with a family member, it's a cool house. So she asks me all the time, when are we going to a cool house, right? Which I'm like, most 5-year-olds
That's
are not
adorable.
Most 5-year-olds aren't asking for, a hotel visit like once a week. But I model that in that when I tell her and I sort of show her when she wants to buy toys, I say, we can't buy that. And I don't say it's because you're not allowed, because we don't have money. I say, well, we're saving our money so that we can go to a cool house, right? And so that makes sense to her because that's something that she wants. And when I tell her, when I just talk, and obviously she's young, so I'm not being like really strict. And to be clear, like my kids have toys, right? Like my kids do not live in like one of those like showroom playrooms that you see on Pinterest. But we also are a family of 4 living in 660 square feet. So we have, physical boundaries to what we have. And I just always modeling that, not that you don't have toys because you're not allowed, but I say, I ask her very bluntly, I said, well, where are we going to put more toys if we get them? And I say, well, if you have lots of toys, we won't be able to go do these things that you want. And admittedly, I think it's probably easier because I was already identified as a minimalist when I had my kids, so I didn't have to do this switch. They've always sort of seen this modeled.
Right.
So I completely admit that, it's probably more challenging if you have kids who've grown up living a certain way. But I think that appealing to their values, even if they're not necessarily what you agree with most at the moment, like what are their hobbies? What do they love doing the most? I just sort of trying to help them see that there are trade-offs. That's something I think a lot about with minimalism and decluttering. It's sort of along that lines, that quote that, you can have anything, but you can't have everything.
Right. Yes.
And kind of imparting that really into my family. And my husband is a natural minimalist. He's just one of those people who doesn't need stuff. So I didn't have to get him on board. And as I said, it wasn't as challenging with me for my kids because
especially if both parents are leading that type of life. That's what you're
thinking of. It blew me away because I have never told my daughter ever, hey, let's declutter. Right. I think there's some things where I'm very mindful that these are my beliefs. And while I do want to impart my values to my kids, I don't want to force them to live a certain way. But twice my daughter has come and decluttered things on her own. And it's just sort of, I think it actually models something really important that I teach in my programs. It's the sense of identity. The things that we own are sometimes a reflection of the story that we want to tell about ourselves, right? If you style your house a certain way, part of that is because you like it, but a big part of it is you want people to look at it and think certain things about you, right? We don't want to admit it. We don't want to talk about it because it kind of feels weird, but it's true, right? There's an identity. We dress a certain way. I know for myself, I actually just recorded a podcast episode that I used to have a lot of insecurities about my appearance. So I was the type of person who would wear 4-inch heels to the grocery store because it kind of projected this confidence I didn't have, right? And so with my daughter, when I think about why I think she decluttered on her own, it's because she is mindful of having a little brother and she's now stepping. She just started primary school. She wants to be a big girl. So she naturally wanted to declutter some of the things that she identified as a child, as a baby, because she's stepping into this role of being, a bigger girl, and sort of encouraging that, not with pressure, but encouraging, if you think about your kids, well, who do you want to be? And do the things you own, project that?
Yes, I love that. I think that's fantastic. And clearly it struck a chord with her at 5 years old, which is amazing.
Yeah. And I think that it's a skill. Don't feel upset. Don't beat yourself up if you're trying these techniques and you find them hard, because of course they're going to be hard. It's something you have to learn. It's something you have to practice. And that's why I talk about compassion and self-kindness being such an important part of it. Whenever I fail, quote unquote, fail, I mean, it's not really a failure, by say like buying things I don't need or doing things that aren't exactly, in the moment I act in a way that wasn't really what I wanted to do. I just try to reflect and say, well, what happened? What was I feeling that made me make a choice that's not really in line with my values? And it's amazing what you can learn about yourself. Like, for example, everybody knows about the value of self-care, right? Everybody talks about it. Every woman these days is seeing like a million memes on the internet about how you need to take care of yourself. But I struggled to really do it until I connected the dots and realized through this self-reflection how much I struggle to act in alignment with my values and priorities when I don't take care of myself. It's like when I don't take care of myself, I just don't care about anything. It's like, yeah, I'm trying to save money, but I don't care. Just order takeaway, right? Or I'm trying to be a certain type of mother, but I actually don't care. Like, you stop caring about anything if your basic needs aren't met.
Right.
And it's when I started to really reflect on that. And again, it sounds so obvious, but sometimes you have to connect those dots for yourself. And then it's like, oh my gosh. And it really helps you make those changes when you have those aha moments.
I agree. And they are seemingly so simple, but incredibly challenging.
Yes.
And that's probably why there's so much talk about it, because we all get it. Like, yeah, that's important, but then actually doing it, or stopping your to-do list halfway through and just saying, you know what, I'm going to read for 20 minutes because I need a break. We just don't do that. Is not our mentality most of the time. It's not our natural tendency. We just keep trying to push through.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting. I was reading this book really recently, and it's funny because it's about marketing. So nothing to do with simple living, but there was this line in it, and I'm going to misquote it. It was Seth Godin, and the book is actually called This is Minimalism. But he talked about this idea that normalization creates culture. So when we normalize something, we're all busy, right? It creates culture. And then that culture drives our choices. So the culture of busyness forces us to, or encourages us to do more. So we make choices to do more. And then that action creates more normalization. So we get stuck in this cycle.
Yes.
So what I noticed is it's sort of like lifestyle creep, right? The busier you are, it's almost like the busier you get. Do you ever notice that? You take on more and it's like a spiral and it gets worse. And so what I've really thought about is how you have to really be intentional about reversing that. It's kind of like, what really triggered this for me? I read this interview once about Elon Musk, and he was saying something how he works like, I don't even remember. It was something ridiculous, like 120 hours a week. I could be misquoting that, but it was a ridiculous number, right? And I was thinking, but that's normal for him. But that wouldn't have been like, he didn't just wake up one day and start working that many hours. It crept up, right? He probably started working 50 hours a week, and then you got used to it. And it creeped up to 55, right? And it's a slow process. And that sometimes when we want to slow down, the problem that we make is we go from having a million things in our life, and then we set down these great intentions where we're going to slow down, but we go from like 100 miles an hour to 30, and that doesn't work. And then we fail, and then we say, well, this slow living experiment is stupid. I give up.
And we beat ourselves up about it.
Yep. Whereas reality, sometimes you have to just creep back the smallest amount. This line, this was inspired by something I heard on a podcast. I think it's called the Life Coach School. I like to give credit for ideas where I get them. And she talked about this idea of I'm going to misquote it, but like a maximum boundary. And it's like this. If I asked you, what is the latest at night that you would think that you would do laundry? And I know with kids, everybody has a different limit. But if I asked you to get up at 3 a.m. to just do laundry on a regular basis, you'd probably say, Jen, that's ridiculous. Wouldn't go at 3 a.m. and do laundry. But would you do it at 11? Would you do it at 10? Right? This is where we're starting to get a bit iffy, right? And everybody has a limit. There's some level that's like your maximum.
Yep.
And what I recommend is like looking at ways we can kind of tune that back and sort of say like, how can we gradually over time make the idea of doing laundry at 11 o'clock at night seem as ridiculous as doing laundry at 3 a.m?
Yes.
And it doesn't happen automatically. It's a really gradual shift.
Yep.
And I find that that's sort of the way that this slow process works better, because it's not, for me, willpower does not work. I am, and I know it's kind of funny because I think that people think that minimalists have a lot of control. I actually recently did a 13 months without shopping for any clothes. They think, oh, you must be the type of person, that type A person who's so in control and so good at following your goals and your rules, which is absolutely the complete opposite of me. I am a super impulsive person. I love instant gratification. I have done literally things like moving to new countries practically on a whim. Like I'm a super impulsive person. So I cannot rely on self-control or willpower to make these kind of choices. I can't just tell myself, hey, Jen, don't do that when I really want to do that. So what I really rely heavily on this idea is of changing my inner culture, like changing over time the idea that I would never do that, right? I used to be the type of personality who could spend 10 hours shopping. Like in my 20s, I shop maybe 5 days a week, all the time. I loved it. It was like my favorite thing to do. And I didn't stop shopping by saying, hey, Jen, shopping's bad, don't do it, because I kind of knew that when I was shopping. I had to slowly create a culture where I just practiced downsizing, where I practiced really focusing on what I want instead. It was a very gradual process. And I think that's what so many people miss when they're making this change. It may take a really long time to slow down, but that doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It probably means that you're doing it right. And now it's going to be sustainable and you're really creating a lifestyle.
Yes.
I always use the example. It's like, do you want to go on a crash diet or do you want to learn how to make healthy lifestyle choices? And one takes a lot of time and a lot of intentional effort, and it's going to be slow, but you're going to get a different result. I not only teach minimalism on my blog and my website, I teach courses. And sometimes I find the things you're supposed to like promise people results, like say, oh, I'm going to help you declutter your house in like 8 weeks, do like a boot camp style. But I refuse to teach it that way just because, you know, my experience is you have to sometimes make slow change to really learn the lessons. Yeah. And I guess, yeah, that whole topic of being slow and steady, it's such a cliche, but it's true, isn't it?
It's true. And it's all of these things are so connected. And I think that that's why it does take a long time too, because there's so many pieces to this puzzle. You know, it's not, like we said, it's not as simple as just, okay, you know, I got rid of half my clothes. Now I've got it. Nope. It's constant, and it always needs to be at the forefront of our mind and needs to be considered when we're making our choices and when we're modeling for our kids. And it does take a long time, but so worth it. I mean, you are clearly so passionate about all of this, as am I. And it's so fun to talk to other people that think this way. Love it. But I mean, you've clearly gotten so much out of this lifestyle and just your unique opportunities that you've had. And also the fact that you're able to earn a living by freelancing and selling courses on your blog. And it's possible because you live simply. So you made certain choices with what you want your life to look like, and you're able to support yourself and be independent and have this slow morning. I mean, honestly, Jen, you got me at slow morning. Like we could have stopped right there, because to me, that is worth every bit of trying this. Because what is, like, when you think of the way you described it, when you think of a slow morning, having that is so luxurious to have a slow morning. I mean, that is like one of the most luxurious things I could ever imagine.
Yes. I'll just add really quick a few things there, because I do just want to reiterate, because sometimes when you see things on the internet, right, you kind of just see one part of the picture.
Right.
And
yes, always.
And I just really like to drive home a bit about transparency. So as I said earlier, I really believe in trade-offs. And look, I have this slow morning and I have this lifestyle because that was my priority, but I made huge sacrifices. For example, and like, just to be completely blunt, I would earn a lot more in my previous career. So I made a very intentional choice.
Right.
I was willing to take a huge step back financially, because for me, success felt more about having that time. We live in 660 square feet, and I'm very happy with that. But it's all about trade-offs. Like I live in a more urban area because I like that lifestyle, and I trade off not having a house, you know, there's some parts of my lifestyle that might seem very enviable to some people, but I also make sacrifices that other people might not be comfortable with.
Right.
And I always feel it's important just to mention that what's right for me may not be right for you, and that's okay. But it's just important to have that big picture.
Yep. And to think of all of those things, like the grass is always greener, but do you really know what it looks like? Right. Do you really know what goes into it? Yeah.
Yeah. And also just speaking about the quote that you read back about my work, I want to also point out that it's not so much that, okay, so obviously people can see the connection. I slowed down and now I teach about those programs. So obviously that's connected. But I think that, if you were thinking, well, how would that work in my life? Like, I don't necessarily want to one day teach people how to declutter and simplify, but I love the idea of one day I'd love to work for myself. And when I started simplifying and decluttering, it wasn't that I didn't have this grand business plan. What it was is, to be completely frank, is I simplified so much, and this was before kids, so I'm going to be honest, it was easier then, that I really downsized my cost of living. So to give people an example, until I had kids, I lived for 3 years in a 140 square foot studio with a shared bathroom and kitchen. So I super downsized. Again, it's not for everyone, but I just want to highlight like the limit to what I went through to create that spatial freedom in my life, and having that financial freedom because my expenses were so low. I mean, we shared, as I said, we didn't even have a private kitchen or bathroom. We shared that with students. We were like 32 and the people we lived with were like 19, but we did it because that was our goal. But it was creating that space gave me the room to experiment and to fail. Whereas most people we live our lives so close to the line that there's no room for failure.
Right.
Like if I said, oh, go just start a new job and a career, just try to write a book. And you'd be like, well, if it doesn't work, I've wasted all that time. And right now time is money. And I understand that. I'm not judging you for that, but I'm saying that's one of the benefits of minimalism is you create that time so that you have space sometimes to fail, because you got to fail at things. You think about a kid, right? How does a kid learn to walk?
Right.
They fall down a million times. But as adults, we have no time to fall down.
Right.
We have no room in our budget to fall down. And so that's the whole one of the huge benefits of simplifying and slowing down isn't necessarily that I want to live a slow life. Some people do, so that's great. But for me, slowing down wasn't necessarily to live a slow life. It was to live a bigger, more exciting life. But I had to slow down to experiment with that.
Yes. And having that freedom and the time to let those failures be, quote unquote failures, be growth opportunities, right? And actually getting to think about them and learn from them, because as kids, that's what we learn to do. And that's how we're raised. But this adulting stuff, it just gets out of hand and it gets so fast and overwhelming. And I've enjoyed doing some of that lately myself, like just really taking a step back and embracing that creative side and being more spontaneous and having that space to play in that way.
Yeah. I mean, surely this podcast, just being able to do something because you care about it and you want to talk about it is just, a gift, a space that some people don't have time. And I just wanted to quickly say, because you're talking about modeling for your kids, and I think that's especially so important as teenagers, because I feel like when I think about my own life, that's where I started to lose that curiosity that we have as kids, but where we just do things because we enjoy them, and where you start sort of feel like everything you do has to be so calculated. I'm doing this to get into the right college. I'm doing this to do everything.
Yeah.
And sure, be intentional, but sometimes intentional living is about experimenting.
Yeah.
It's about choosing the direction where you want to go, choosing an idea that you want to experiment with. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have everything planned out.
So good. I love that. And I have a teenager in the house, so that will definitely be something I'm thinking about. It's 100% the truth. You are just so much fun to talk to, Jen.
Oh, thank you. I love to talk about these things. The reason I do this is because I remember so distinctly how sort of trapped I felt in my life. And I know it's a real cliche, but I had that moment where you sort of look in the mirror and you think, is this the life that I've built for myself? I think everyone kind of gets that point where you're so hopeful as a kid and a teen, and you grew up thinking that you're going to have all these possibilities in your life, and then one day you wake up and you look in the mirror and you're like, this is not what I wanted for myself. And I know that there's so many voices. For me in particular, I really remember hearing people sort of saying like, you're expecting too much, you're asking too much out of life. This is just adulting. You've got to get used to it. Of course, you're stressed and busy, and I'm sure you've heard the same thing. And that's kind of what I really feel like the slow living movement is really pushing against, is this idea that, hey, it's not going to look the same for everyone, but it's possible. Things are possible. You don't have to settle.
Exactly. I think that really struck me. And it wasn't that long ago where I was like, wait a minute, I have a choice. Like, it does not have to be this way. And for the longest time, I just thought, oh, that's just how it is, and you accept it until you can't accept it anymore, until it's killing you and you're burnt out. And then you're like, okay, now what? And I realized
100%.
like, I am making these choices. I'm an adult. That's the beauty of being an adult. You have that freedom to make different choices. And I think that's huge once you truly realize it and then embrace it.
Absolutely.
If we keep making the same choices, we're going to keep ending up in the same spot. So we need to change.
And I think that's really just the kicking point. Like, if I could leave people with one message, it's just that you don't have to settle. I'm not saying that you're going to get the same results as everyone. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it's going to be fast, but different is possible. But the first thing you have to do is decide that it's worth trying.
Yes.
Because if you never decide that it's worth trying, it's really hard to make any kind of progress.
Yep. And give yourself the grace to try it, and just no pressure. See how it goes.
Exactly.
Figure out what works for you. There's just such pressure to be perfectionist, and it can be heavy. So you have to put it all aside and choose to maybe just turn that off or drown it out and just focus on, what do I really want? Where do I really want to go? Is this really serving me, or am I just doing it because I think I'm supposed to do it?
So true. And the more you connect to that vision, the easier the other stuff is going to be. Yep. The more you connect to who you are, the less you're influenced by the voices that are telling you who you should be.
Exactly. And it does fuel that fire. I have found once I really embraced that and was living more aligned, I started to get my energy back. Mm-hmm. And because it's really exhausting when you're doing things that you really don't feel like you want to do or you should do, when you're fighting it constantly.
Oh, yes.
And when you stop fighting those natural tendencies and just allow yourself to live in alignment with who you really are, it feels better.
Absolutely. You don't realize the weight that you're carrying until you stop carrying it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very freeing. And it goes back to all that space you were talking about, that space, you have energy, you can breathe. And in my opinion, it's just a much, much more enjoyable way to go through life, because it is the joy is in the journey. And, that end game, it's not all about that final goal, and that those end visions are going to change constantly in every season of our life. Just give yourself the grace to not be perfect at it and just to enjoy it, because life is so beautiful and there's so much around us that is easy to miss if you don't have the space to notice and enjoy and take it all in. And I think it's a true gift. And I don't think there could ever be a price tag on this stuff, because it is a feeling. And I think we're all worth it, like the self-care, you're allowed to be good to yourself.
That is so important. That line that you're worth it. I found that with so many of the people that I've worked with, one of the big challenges they have to this idea of intentional living, it's like, for a lot of women in particular, who am I to put my needs first? Who am I to live the life that I want, when really I should be helping everyone else live the life that they want? Yes. And so that's a huge part of it, is stepping into that space where I say it's okay to be myself and to work towards the things that matter to me.
Yep. And you're going to be a better mom, wife, friend, daughter, all of those things when you treat yourself good, when you treat yourself well and take care of yourself.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great note to end on today. And I know we talked about so many things, and Jen has an amazing blog, simplyfiercely.com. I'm going to link everything in the show notes, and I encourage everybody to check her out, check out her podcast and courses too. I mean, you have so much to offer, and there's so much to learn on this topic, and you've been doing it for a long time now. So Learn from one of the experts, guys. Check her out. Jen, thank you so much.
No worries. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to chat. And I hope we stay in touch. Keep talking about it, bringing the message to the people.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode and have been inspired to slow down and start living life at your own pace. As a brand new podcast, your listener voice matters. If Let's Slow Down is resonating with you, please take a minute to leave a review and rate us. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen and share it with friends. Remember, this is a process, so go easy on yourself. Be gentle and take all the space you need to thrive, because the world needs you to be at your best, to love and serve others and yourself.